This is Temur Kodama Landfall Shenanigans, capital S. Kodama lets us put things in for free, and it does not say non-lands, so we're going to go ham with that ability. Honestly, some of the stuff these cards can do is a little bit ridiculous in the best way possible. I'm going to walk you through all the cool synergies and how we got here. And if you want to browse all the cards I talked about this episode, there's a link below. I hope you feel inspired to do some turbo landfall shenanigans. I'm not going to give you a deck. I'm going to teach you to deck. But first I got to do a little bit of business, and I promise I'll be quick about it. 2 ads, 1 fake, 1 real. Are you hungry? Don't have time to decide what to eat? Or maybe you're not sure? Use Portal Dash from Darksteel Industries. Download the app and choose whatever restaurant you like, and we'll open a portal right in your living room and bring that food straight to you, hot and fresh. We mean it. We can get something from any place, even McDonald's. We employ only true Phyrexians to bring your food to you. No need to tip them, gratuities included. And after they drop off your food, they'll just quietly leave your home and get about to all the other business we have planned for them on Earthplane. Don't worry about it. Enjoy your food. You'll never see them again until the plan is fully formed. And here's the relat from the Wizard's Tower. WizardTower.com. Not only is that a great website to look up articles about Commander and other formats, it's a great place to buy Magic singles. And if you're watching this in Canada, you can use coupon code BREWBROTHERS to get actual money off your Magic singles. And they ship pretty quick. No portals this time. And now, back to the show. Kodama is a hefty 6 mana value commander, but being able to put in permanents for free is incredible. The key is that the free one has to have mana value equal or lesser than the permanent that just came in. And lands have 0 mana value. So if we play our land for the turn, we get to put another land of 0 mana value in for free. Unless that token is a copy of something, it's got mana value 0. That means every time we make a token, we get to put a land down. But who's our partner? Toggo's the obvious choice because Toggo does make artifact tokens. We make a rock, we get to put down a land. That land makes another rock, which lets us put another land into play. You can imagine how this gets out of hand. But we're not going to be going with Toggo as our partner because we want blue. We need to keep our hand full of cards so that we can keep drawing lands to actually have things to put into play. I don't want to just put in 2 or 3 lands per turn. I want to put in like 7 or 8 at a time. And if we want to go Temur, that only leaves us 2 options as a partner. Ludovic only costs 3, but if we run Crumb, we have the potential to draw even more cards. Plus, if our plan is working, I don't think having to pay a little bit more for Crumb is really much of a drawback. We'll have the mana for it. And the main reason we want blue is for card draw, but in particular, landfall-based card draw. Of course, we're going to go with the original Tatyova Benthic Druid for our landfall card draw. This is how the whole engine's going to work. Whenever we play a land, Kodama lets us play another land. And when we do, Tatyova lets us draw a card. And as long as we've drawn a land, we can keep putting them into play with Kodama's ability. But we need some redundancy. Aesi, Tyrant of Gyre Strait, not as good as Tatyova. We're not gaining life. It does cost an extra mana to bring down, but being able to play an extra land for the turn is something, but it's less something when we're planning on putting down 5 to 10 lands per turn. Honestly, no matter what else they said on this card, we would probably run it because we need the redundancy. Something like Lotus Cobra is also very useful to keep us in business of mana. Every time we're playing a land, maybe we're drawing off one of those cards, but we're also getting extra mana in the mana pool. In addition to the land we just put in, that might allow us to cast something big, which lets us do the whole thing over again with Kodama. And shout out to Sarenth the Great Worm for a second. This card's only $1 right now, but it's a mythic and it's fantastic. Did you notice the key thing about this card? Because I didn't at first. It does not say whenever you play a land. Whenever a land enters, you make a Power Stone. If our opponents are ramping Kraken fetches, that's multiple Power Stones for us. And not to mention, each Power Stone is another 0 mana value artifact that triggers Kodama that lets us put another land into play. It's almost trivial to be able to make tokens as you get landfall triggers. I mean, the redundancy here is pretty big. Take your pick. There's even enough options here that we can fine-tune the makeup of our deck for slightly different overall strategies. Depends what you like. Toggo, as I mentioned before, is a classic with Kodama, so that's one way we can get this going. Landfall makes us a rock, which is mostly useless. Tireless Provisioner's got a landfall trigger where we make another 0 mana artifact, only this time we get our choice of a food, a treasure, or just the 2. Keep mixing this up with Tireless Tracker, who's the other tireless one who makes the clues. Greensleeve's Morrow Sorcerer slipped under my radar. I mean, I know I must have read this card at some point, but I forgot it existed. Not only will this thing get huge, but as we keep dumping more lands, we make 3/3 Badgers. Phylath World Sculptor, also awesome. Not only are we making a lot of plants, we're making other plants even bigger. Rampaging Baloths is another 6-drop, but it makes some of the biggest tokens out there for land. And if you'd rather go wide, there's nothing better than Scute Swarm. Since we're expecting to put down a handful of lands at once, we'll go from 1 Scute Swarm to I don't know, a game-winning amount out of nowhere. It sucks to get something cool going, but then because of a couple of bad draws, you end up not having more lands to put into play, and then you have to stop having this particular kind of fun. So that's where these types of sorceries come in. Kodama doesn't say that the lands come into play tapped. If they're basics, we can put one down and use it right away. That's where these green sorceries come in handy. They only cost 1 mana. They help keep our hand full of lands to put in for more triggers, and since we can pay for them with the forest we just put in, we'll always have mana for them. There's so many of these. I mean, how many do you want? If tracking that 2 energy is a little bit too much of a pain in the butt for you, no problem. You don't have to use this one. Brothers War even gave us one with a fight spell attached. I think that's the biggest upside on one of these I've seen, besides the one that lets you tutor, but we need black for that one. I do like having the option of kicker. I mean, I'm always happy to have more lands in my hand with this kind of deck. And we've even got an option to grab a gate so that we can fix one of our other colors if need be, or maybe not. Maybe lands coming in tapped isn't worth it for you. Choices. So many choices. It's all about the card draw. That's easily the most valuable aspect of the deck, but there's even more ways we can do that. As I mentioned before, there aren't as many cards that give us some sort of landfall trigger to draw cards as I would like. These cards help a lot. Awaken the Woods is already $20, and I don't see it going down unless there's a major reprint, because this will be a landfall staple for all eternity for every landfall deck in the future of the game. Landfall decks are already good at making a bunch of mana. This one's no exception. And then we can make X forests. They're land creatures. It's basically green X landfall X times. Incredible. Ancient Green Warden helps us play lands from our graveyard, which will be especially useful if we want to run a bunch of fetches like Evolving Wilds and things like that. They let us double dip on the front side, and also Ancient Green Warden lets us bring them back again from the graveyard. Let's go for round 2. And the Green Warden doubles landfall triggers. Doesn't do much without Tetiova, but if we do have Tetiova, now we're drawing 2 per landfall. Panharmonicon sounds like an automatic include, but we have to be careful. It only works on creatures or artifacts entering the battlefield. So playing a land won't give us extra landfall triggers. We won't be able to draw extra cards from. But if we're making token creatures, or if we're making token artifacts, that will trigger Kodama twice, allowing us to play 2 lands that turn. And then something like Tetiova, Steward of Tides. If we can chain together a ton of land drops, we could make a big push for some sort of lethal swing with all of our 3/3 flying elemental creatures with haste. And then round that up with a Retreat to Coral Helm, so that now that we're playing lands, we're tapping down our opposing creatures, the ones that'll put up a roadblock anyway, so that we should have an unobstructed path to victory. As fun as it is to make 128 copies of Skewed Swarm off of 7 landfall triggers, it doesn't do us a whole lot of good if we can't attack to them and we give our opponents a full turn cycle to come up with a Wrath. So this is where the haste comes in. Anger is a classic. We just got to make sure we can get it into our graveyard somehow, and now all of our creature tokens will have haste. Cavalier of Flame is the best rate for a creature that pumps up the whole team. We only need to pay 1 in a red to give the whole team haste, with a power boost. And if we have more mana left over, we can pay a little bit more to just make the team even harder hitting. Fervor is a cheap way to make that happen on an enchantment, a little bit harder to deal with. Fires of Yavimaya, same thing, only this one's actually even cheaper in real life. It's a quarter. Temur Ascendancy is about $5, and it is a 3 mana enchantment that also gives all your creatures haste. Depending on what we've got going on, we might be able to trigger the card draw, which is again really important. Remember those Baloths that make 4/4 beast tokens? This makes that into another Tetiova, basically. I'm not going to go super deep with this, but if we had a way to get a bunch of anthems down, all of those smaller tokens would enter even larger, which would make this another Tetiova, but that starts to clutter up the deck a little bit more than I'd like. I think I'm already running more than 40 lands. Retreat to Coral Helm says tap or untap. We could brew in a way to draw more cards as we untap things. And like I said, if we can manage to draw enough cards, we never have to stop chaining lands. Landfall forever! So let's look at some creatures that we can untap to get more lands in hand to keep the party going. Needless to say, these also go well with those haste enablers. Merfolk Looter can get a lot done, but we're not actually up a card with a looter alone. We will eventually run out of gas with just this. Fantastic backup though if we've got other draw happening. Keeps us stocked with lands. Archivist is a classic. It's simple. It does what it says. You tap it, you draw a card, and with landfall, Retreat to Coral Helm lets us untap it and draw another card. It's sort of another Tetiova. Arcanus the Omnipotent is the big brother of Archivist. Now we're drawing 3 cards per turn. Enclave Cryptologist is another card that lets us tap to draw a card, but we do have to invest some mana on that level up. 6 in total, plus the 1 to cast it. But with the amount of mana we're generating, I don't think that'll be a huge problem. And a super interesting side bonus is Aluwando the Seer. This is like a looter. We draw a card, but then we exile a card from our hand and put time counters on it. The danger here is that if someone gets rid of Aluando before those time counters have gone away, we've got nothing taking them down. They'll be trapped in exile forever. But if we're able to untap Aluando with that retreat to Coral Helm, not only is that taking more time counters off to bring them in faster, but all those things we're exiling, the things that aren't lands because we want to keep those in hand, are coming into play as well. This thing ramps up our engine big time. And need I remind you, when these things do come in, if they're permanents, Kodama sees that and lets us put out another permanent from our hand. Maybe just a land. I don't know. Swarming your opponents with hasty tokens is a lot of fun. But if that's not your style, don't worry, I got you covered. Here's a few other routes to victory that we could put in the deck. Kaidel, Chosen of Crewfix, is going to be able to tap for a ton of colorless mana, especially if we've got Retreat to Coral Helm and we've been drawing a bunch of cards. We could make tons. That leads up to a perfect Blue Sun Zenith, which is a great example of why this particular card is the best of its kind. It shuffles back in, so we can stock our hand full of cards on an end step to get ready for a huge turn going off with extra land drops, and then it'll be back in the deck, so if we draw it later and we can make enough mana, we could deck out an opponent. Or 2, or 3. Reckless Fireweaver is an option if we're going the making artifact tokens route. Every artifact token that we make on landfall, maybe toggles rocks, does a damage to each opponent. I mean, Witty Roastmaster does the same things for creatures, which is way easier to achieve. This is another shout out to the Scute Swarm. Every landfall doubles the amount of damage we're doing to each opponent with this thing. Pretty good. Tunneling Geopede's a basic version that hits them on the landfall trigger, which is nice. And then of course Marog, Fury of Akum, will have near infinite combat steps with this. Just one little creature with evasion and that's gotta be game, right? And I think we do have to look at Laboratory Maniac. If we can somehow set ourselves up so we're drawing 3 cards per land we put down, we get Kodama out, and that's probably enough to draw our entire deck that turn. And whenever that's possible, Laboratory Maniac helps us turn that into a win instead of a loss. And if for any reason you're concerned that we have to be able to rescue ourselves from milling ourselves out from decking, Kodama's ability, may I remind you, does work at instant speed. If we can flash in a permanent with mana value 3 or greater, that's a way to put Laboratory Maniac from our hand right into play using Kodama's ability. Shimmermere seems like the easiest one to pull off because it's 3 colorless mana. It has flash, so it's going to enter. That lets us put in Laboratory Maniac. I can't be too excited running a 3 mana card that effectively does nothing. We're not an artifact deck, so we're not going to give all our other artifacts flash. But if we did, that'd be a fun side angle anyway. Oh boy, there's just too many options. I think that's going to have to be a brew for another time. Okay, you made it this far, and this has been the fun stuff. The next segment is not for the faint of heart. You have to have just the right kind of play group for this one. I do not recommend what I'm about to talk about if you're going to bring your deck to a random LGS and play with strangers for the first time. I'm talking Warp World. I fell in love with this card as soon as I read it. It's a doozy. Maybe one of the saltiest cards in the game. People say that's going to be something like Expropriate, but Warp World and the amount of administration it requires the table to do, people hate it. It's chaos. It's like a one-shot chaos, so that's why I don't mind it so much. I do think that Possibility Storm, those kind of like endless chaos, inescapable chaos, I think that's bad for the fun. Overall, it's a net loss, but I do think Warp World, although salty, it could be pretty good for one just blast of chaos. Man, when all this stuff comes in, that stack gets so complicated. Personally, I think it can be kind of fun to like mentally work out the stack. And I do think that there's going to be 1 or 2 other decks out there that might enjoy this effect as well. If it gives someone else a win, I don't mind that. I think this is going to be spectacular. If you are an instant or sorcery deck though, I feel bad for you. This will not work out well for you. You better have the counter for it. But all of the lands, artifacts, and creatures come into play at the same time. That means they all see each other. If anything has landfall on it, it will be triggered as many times as all the lands we put in. Enchantments come later. So we have to make sure we're not running enchantments with landfall because those will miss out. And I think a key detail here is it does not say draw the cards from your library. You just reveal that many. I can imagine a world where we are able to put out more than 98 permanents on the battlefield with all the little tokens and extra stuff. I mean, Scute Swarm alone would get us well over that amount. And if Warp World said draw that many cards, we would deck ourselves that way. But as long as we're doing this, we put out everything that we get. Tatyova will see every single one of those lands come in. So we're about to draw a ton of cards. This is where if we did go through the rest of our deck, we would be in trouble. We could be at risk of decking ourselves for a loss. But as long as that Laboratory Maniac pops out, then we're golden. Thassa's Oracle is another Laboratory Maniac type effect. It's not a static ability that protects us from dying that way, but as long as we can put the stack in the right way so that Thassa's Oracle resolves right as we're about to draw some cards. We've drawn a few left. Let's say there's some left in our library. Count them up. We got 11 left. Cool. I'll put the Thassa's Oracle trigger after I'm able to draw like 9 or 10 cards just to be safe. I mean, if you land into a Skewed Swarm, which I've mentioned 100 times already, that's going to put hundreds. Like a joke that 7 lands makes us 128 earlier, and that does seem difficult, but not with a Warp World. We hit something to give them haste, like, I don't know, another secret Brutaclad deck. Truly, I have a problem. But we'll make all these tokens at once. We'll go to our combat step. They'll all have haste because of Brutaclad, billions of Skewed Swarms. And at this point, like, what are you going to do? Do you want to just turn all of your tokens into more Skewed Swarms, then crack a fetch, and then just double them yet again? Or, remember I said enchantments don't work? Artifacts do, so maybe we sneak in a minion reflector. The minion reflector will probably hit the battlefield, and it will see all of the non-token creatures come into play. We just get to pay 2 for whichever one we want a duplicate of, and then Brutaclad can look at all of them and be like, okay, you're all that. I don't know, maybe a rampaging Baloth. Now we crack our fetch and make dozens and dozens of hasty 4/4 beasts. Oh, if this sounds fun to you, let me know in the comments. If you want to look over all the cards I talked about, there's a link below. And I appreciate you taking the time to watch the video. A like and a subscribe is a great way to support for just a couple of clicks, or smashes, or whatever verb content creators are supposed to use these days. The most impactful way you can support the show is through patreon.com/commandersbrew. And in the meantime, you keep being you. World's a better place for it. I'll see you next time. If you want to check out another episode I did that is about kind of disgusting value, Simic, go figure, that'll be Essex Fractal Bloom. It was fun trying to optimize this one to make sure you get the maximum number of tokens with as little time for your opponents to react to it as possible.